This is the Sierra Club New Jersey chapter presentation. Thank you so much for having me. This is a presentation on your guide to your whole house electrification plan. And I'm presenting this from the standpoint of Green Insight, which is a personal consulting company where I can assist in single-family home decarbonization and electrification plans. So contact information is there, and you can go to the next slide, please. So why decarbonize or electrify? You know, I think some people think that electrification is a little bit different than decarbonization, but ultimately we're electrifying to decarbonize, right? The grid is becoming less and less carbon intensive with penetration of renewable energy at scale, and that's going to continue into the future. So the electricity that you get from the grid will be less and less carbon intensive, while today it's a little mix. It's got natural gas as well as coal and a couple other resources mixed in, but ultimately renewable energy is penetrating the grid. So, you know, climate change requires everyone's action today. There's a global mean temperature continues to rise. I think over the past 12 months, we have been at an average of 1.24 degrees Celsius. We have been above 1.5 degrees Celsius for 12 months, and January was 1.7 degrees Celsius. So, you know, this is a atmospheric CO2 is above 400 parts per million. It continues to go up, and then it's well documented that this is anthropogenic greenhouse gas. So it's caused by the burning of fossil fuels, so fossil gas as well as oil and coal as the main contributors. So I also want to point out the right-hand slide, which shows solar activity versus temperature. So I'm trying to make sure everyone's aware that irradiance from the sun has actually decreased a little bit while temperatures globally have increased, as well as heating oceans and clear spike in carbon emissions. So this is a driving reason for my ambitions, but at the same time, this is helpful to start with the why. So next slide. Another why is that you know, 2027 is really a mark of inflection for greenhouse gas reduction globally, as well in the United States and New Jersey. New Jersey happens to be warming twice as fast as the rest of the country. And, you know, renewable energy and clean fuels and clean technology are really a solution here that we need to lean into. Geothermal wind are cheap, they're safe, they're abundant, they require very little water, and they also afford us energy freedom and resiliency. So the graph on the right shows a vertical axis of safety versus carbon emissions, and you can see wind and solar down there in the very low as safest in terms of energy production and incidence to produce the amount of energy. The graph on the right shows you that the longer we wait to decarbonize, the harder and harder and the faster and steeper the decline has to be to stay within a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming. So next slide, please. Oh, I think you went one too far.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Oh, no,
next
that
slide.
is it.
Yep. So carbon and energy reduction with energy efficiency and renewables. So the path to decarbonize is fairly simple at a very high level, which is, you know, reduce energy demand with home energy efficiency upgrades. There's plenty of services that do whole house energy evaluations, blower tests, as well as checking out your lighting and where your air leaks are. That's number one. Get your house tested and seal up the envelope as much as possible, upgrade where possible. A lot of new utilities and features in your house can be more energy efficient, and there's plenty of means and mechanisms to do that. So consider replacing appliances that use less energy or are more efficient. And then finally, once you do that, you want to offset as much electric and heating demand with solar and heat pumps, which are electric solutions, as possible. And then the balance, you know, you can consider buying clean renewable energy from third-party markets across the utility. So in many ways across the United States, electricity is deregulated, so you can purchase the actual kilowatt hours or electrons from a third party that is either 100% wind, 100% solar. So you want to do that in instances where you can't offset your electric with solar. Maybe there's shade on your house. Maybe you have trouble installing a heat pump, but ultimately electrifying and then offsetting is the best way to go. And that's what I do. Ground source heat pumps and heat pumps are very important. These allow you to take care of your heating and cooling. So we think of electric as one base load, but then your heating and cooling ends up being potentially up to 50%, 60% of your carbon emissions in a natural gas furnace or oil. So a heat pump is 300 to 500% more efficient than a natural gas furnace, and there's huge savings. But again, it adds electrical load, so you want to size it appropriately and look at how do I offset that load with solar or an appropriate size solar system or a community solar purchasing. So different solar photovoltaic systems, it all depends upon your independent situation. But if you have land, consider using ground mount solar, which is going to be less expensive potentially. In commercial applications, you can do rooftop or carport. In residential applications, they make plenty of different solar panels. They can be installed in one day. They can be designed and permitted in right now, 3 to 6 months. And ultimately, this allows you to install a solar system on your house. Now, if you have shading or some other way, there are community solar programs in New Jersey where you can buy a subscription to a commercial platform, a commercial solar system, and claim those benefits. Next slide. Okay, so I'll go through residential case studies, including my carbon reduction plan and the microgrid I built at my house, and then also another one for Maryland, and then we could get into questions and answers. So next slide, please. So first, there we go. So first I want to explain what a microgrid is. The definition for DOE is a group of interconnected loads and distributed energy resources within defined boundaries that act as a single controllable entity with respect to the grid. A microgrid can connect and disconnect from the grid and enable it to operate in both grid-connected or island modes. And microgrids come in all shapes and sizes. One of the things I learned as a reliability engineer was that a microgrid and distributed energy resources, solar and wind and battery storage or energy storage systems allows you to set up property management energy ecosystems down to the home level. So this is very reliable when it's done well. A single family home like mine can go into island mode or be grid connected, and ultimately it serves as a microgrid. But similarly, a fleet or a community could be set up as a microgrid because of energy production and energy management. Now, not all microgrids are the same. Maybe they can survive off-grid for an hour, 2 hours. It all depends upon how the load is and how the storage is. In my instance, I set it up so that I can almost survive indefinitely if the grid goes down with solar and a battery storage system, which I'll get into. And a good microgrid is designed to be interoperable with the grid, so it offers benefits to both the grid operator and also services to your neighbors, but at the same time allows you to have resilient and sustainability at the same time as energy independence and reliability. So next slide, please. So this is a graph of carbon emissions and energy consumption in kilowatt hours. So what I did is over the years from 2018 onward, I committed to major investments in my house for decarbonization. The first investment was energy efficiency, and I upgraded the insulation, the windows, as well as doing a blower test, and did as much as I could in that regard. And then I installed a solar system. And the first drop in the green bar denotes, go back one, please.
There we go.
Denotes the drop in carbon emissions from going to solar. The solar system was 13,000 watts. It produced around 14,000 kilowatt hours a year, and it reduced a good chunk of my carbon emissions. and reduce my energy consumption. The second drop, the big drop, was actually installing a ground source heat pump in 2019, 2020. This is where I no longer use fossil fuel or fossil gas and to heat and cool my house, and then also electrified my transportation with electric vehicles and charging a level 2 charger at my house. And then finally, the final piece was installing a 52 kilowatt hour energy storage system in my garage, which allows me to go into backup mode and island mode. And if the grid goes down, I have heat, cooling, and electric almost indefinitely. So zero carbon emissions. And this also includes all of the lawn care equipment. So snow blower, leaf blower, lawnmower, weed whacker, all those things are a brand that can be purchased at Home Depot or Lowe's. So those are powered also by the solar system, and anything that's not covered is through a third party that I purchased 100% clean energy. So my next step is to get an electric pickup truck that's vehicle to building capable, vehicle to home, and add that to the microgrid so that it can back up my house as well. But overall, 80% gross energy reduction, and zero carbon emissions in 3 years. Now, you can do this faster, but I had a learning process through this, which is I'm really happy to share with anyone on how to do this. All right, next slide, please. So just to get a little bit into the cash flows, it's important to note that the plan that I put together was cash flow positive from day one, meaning that, there was investments, but there was also investment tax credits that are good through 2032. So there's a good appetite and window of opportunity for these types of projects while the investment tax credit is there. But ultimately, the benefit is hedging myself against inflation, not paying for gasoline anymore, natural gas or electric. There's $159,000 in net cash flow from this system over the next 25 years. All the systems have a 25-year warranty, and the ROI is about 8%. I took out a solar loan for 20 years and a geothermal loan for 5 years. But the immediate savings come from not buying natural gas anymore, not paying for electric. In New Jersey, there's SREC credits that you can monetize for your solar production, and then the investment tax credit brings down the net cost of these systems. So the assumptions in some of these, this is a forecast of mine, but built in is a 3% escalator for utilities and around $200 to $210 of SRECs for 10 years. And then a 15-year replacement of natural gas furnace. So comparing side by side, you can see, not only are you saving a lot of money over time with a good return on investment, but additionally, there's almost 1,400 metric tons of carbon emission savings just for my household, my property. So two main benefits: cash flow as well as profitability and carbon reduction. Next slide, please. So this represents the cash flow for the renewable transition. So because I took out a very front-end loaded geothermal loan, the first couple of years were cash flow negative, but then they moved into cash flow positive. So the return on investment ultimately hit around year 7 or 8. And there was also 15,000 additional rebates for the cars and more savings beyond this because the warranty and these systems will survive beyond 25 years after the warranty. The ground loop for the ground source heat pump is 50 to 100 years. So ultimately, that was a heavier piece of the investment for ground source heat pumps, is this geo exchange loop. But ultimately, that survives much longer than the mechanical systems inside the house. So this is a graph of cumulative cash flows as well as the upfront cash flows that I took. Slide, please. So solar production, I want to point out some graphs here. So I love graphs. I love Excel. So all of these graphs are self-created, but ultimately the blue represents the residential load. or the production of the solar system, and then the orange represents the load. So the load fluctuates, daily. Your heat pump's kicking on and off, or your furnace is kicking on and off. You're plugging in electric vehicles. You're running, electric dryer. So that load is going to be highly oscillating, but typically, you're going to be using a lot of electricity in the summertime when your air conditioning is running, and using a lot of natural gas in the wintertime when your furnace is running. So this cycle really broke when I installed the ground source heat pump, and it really became very level and stable over the annual basis. So because the ground source heat pump does heating and cooling, and in our area, those loads are relatively stable, from a burden standpoint, winter versus summer. The ground source heat pump is so efficient that the peak loads dropped, and the summer peak demands lowered after the geothermal was installed, and the output peak was around 75 kilowatt hours per day in June and July for the solar system. So lowest is in December. The sun is lower in the sky, the azimuth is down, as well as fewer hours of sunshine. So in the wintertime, you can expect lower production from your solar system. But in the summertime, through net meter laws, you get credit for the kilowatt hours that go back to the grid, and then those are used to balance off low production months. So in the spring, I usually have a surplus. The trees don't have leaves on them. There's lots of good sun. And ultimately, the temperatures are mild, so the heating or cooling burden is very low. Same thing with the fall. The lower right-hand graph is the production of the solar system across the years from 2019 to 2023. This is what I enter into the GATS system in New Jersey, and what I use to get the SRECs. So, there's variability year over year, but at the same time, there's also consistency from a standpoint of kilowatt hours. Next slide. So a little bit about ground source heat pumps. Heat pumps are great in general. Ground source heat pump I went with because it was the most efficient per energy load, coefficient of performance of over 500% sometimes. It doesn't use any water when it's in production. You have year-round comfort. It's quiet. There's low humidity in the house. It's also flexible design, so I can add extra loops if I needed. It improves the aesthetics because there's no heat exchanger on the outside of the house. So the pad where the heat exchanger was for the furnace or for the air conditioner has gone away. It has very good environmental impact. It's durable without any exposed parts. Everything's underground or inside the house. That reduces vandalism and also has very low maintenance, typically 1/3 of furnace maintenance. It also has zone heating and cooling, so I have baseload hydronic heating. So there's hot water baseboards, and then there's also forced hot air. So it's a dual system that the heat pump supports and makes very comfortable air as well as humidity in the house. Obviously, no fossil fuel supply chain, no natural gas or oil, and there's commercial and residential applications. So, and if you have a piece of property, the geothermal loop in my yard is only about a 20 square foot area, 20 feet by 20 feet. They were able to drill 4 wells. So you don't actually need a lot of land if you're going vertical with these geothermal wells. That's what I did because there was a piece of property to the north of my house. I couldn't grow a garden. It was just a dirt patch, and it was also close to my furnace side. So I used that for the geothermal wells. And according to the EPA, geo-exchange systems are the most energy efficient, environmentally clean, and cost-efficient space conditioning systems available. And I can attest to this. Very comfortable in the winter, very comfortable in the summertime. We just set it at a specific temperature and let the geothermal system do all the work and modulate itself. And the environmental impacts are even better when you power it with a clean, 100% renewable, zero emission source like power, or like a solar power, or a clean energy third-party purchasing means. So purchasing electricity or producing electricity to power the ground source heat pump brings the carbon emissions down to zero, right? So next slide, please. So a little bit on geothermal systems. I did a lot of research because of this, but you can have an open loop or a closed loop geothermal system. You can have a horizontal trench. You can be submerged in a pond. You can do vertical drilling wells. In my case, I had 3 vertical wells, 250 feet down in Parsippany. So the total geo-exchange loop was 750 linear feet. So it goes out of my house through the ground source heat pump loop, 750 feet, and then the water comes back in. So in the wintertime, the geothermal system is taking heat out of the ground and putting it into the house. In the summertime, it's taking heat out of the house and putting it into the ground. So it runs in reverse. So lots of flexibility here and a lot of applications. You can also install a geothermal system with a well. If you have a well system, that's oftentimes applicable, and some of these systems cost less. So depending upon your land situation, or if you're close to a body of water or well, sometimes the cost of these systems can get much lower than mine. Mine was a retrofit, and I had to drill a geo-exchange well. Next slide, please. So, I mentioned this is the geothermal system in my house. It includes a geothermal system, a stationary storage tank, as well as all my hot water heating. So the hot water that I gets heated up to around 120 degrees, as well as the baseboard water, and that's what we use for hot water. So that we also did away with our hot water furnace. And a heat pump is a central heating and cooling system. And ultimately, like I mentioned, in heating mode, you're extracting heat from the home, extracting heat from the house and putting it into, extracting heat from the ground and putting it into the house. In cooling mode, you're moving heat to the ground from the house. So we have the air handler in the attic. There's cold water that circulates through there. It cools the air. And ultimately, as you run the geothermal system, the heat goes out through the water and then gets put back into the ground. So it's very quiet and efficient. Next slide, please. So our geothermal system here was installed in 2020. It took about a week to drill the wells. As I mentioned, 3 250 feet vertical wells, as well as an completely underground loop. And then the installation inside the house took about a week or 6 days. So they went in the attic and they replaced the air handler for the air conditioning. They also put in 12 inches of blown-in insulation in the attic to make it even better. In the basement, they replaced the hot water heater, all the pumps. They installed the storage tank and the water furnace geothermal system, and then they removed the outside AC condenser. So you can see before and after pictures and what was removed: the furnace, the natural gas hot water heater, as well as the air handler and the condenser on the outside. And then what was installed was this equipment. I do love this picture of the capped emission vent. They plugged it with concrete, so you can see very clearly where the emissions were going from the furnace, and no longer is that the case. Next slide, please. And then the final piece that I installed for the house was a SunPower SunVault energy storage system. This was 52 kilowatt hours. You can see a picture in the lower right-hand corner. I installed it in my garage, which is pretty nice temperature. It's warmer than the outside air, but it's also perfectly fine in our conditions and our weather conditions. So I installed that in 2022. It backs up the entire house, including EV vehicles. It backs up and powers the geothermal system. So in the wintertime, if the grid goes out, I can still heat my house. In the summertime, if the grid goes out, I can still cool my house and keep all electrical loads backed up. It also pairs with the solar system and recharges during the day. So when the sun is out, it's recharging the batteries. And then when those are needed in island mode, I have it in emergency standby, but it can also be used to balance load with virtual power plants. Now, New Jersey doesn't have a VPP program, but ultimately the grid benefits of an energy storage system are there as well. I'm hoping New Jersey opens up something like this, but the idea is that this energy storage system could stay in island mode, but at the same time provide grid services to neighbors or the grid by balancing frequency, using arbitrage, being a backup load for the grid or other grid means so that it's not, wasted. So in my case, this was a really important feature because it adds resiliency, peace of mind, and it was the final piece to create a microgrid for my house. There is a link to Mega SunVault storage system. It's a very short video online, but it shows you kind of a fun video of how these were installed. And as I mentioned, the next piece that we're looking to install is a EV pickup truck, 100% EV pickup truck. These typically have 100 to 120 kilowatt hour batteries and can provide 7,000 to 9,000 watts of vehicle to home solutions. There are some that could potentially be paired with the SunVault and the solar system, and then add, additional backup solutions for my house so that I have 100% certainty that I could be in off-grid mode for indefinitely, right? So, next slide. This is my original plug-in hybrid vehicle. I did some savings analysis, tracked all of the miles in hybrid mode, miles in gas. And the interesting thing here was that, the cost per mile was 3x lower for an EV in EV mode. This Volt could go 70 miles on EV, which was perfectly fine for almost all our driving. And then ultimately with savings and lower maintenance fees, I was saving around $750 a year. So I stopped tracking this after a while. At this point, it was only $3 a gallon. Now we're up to about $3.75 a gallon. So, there's even more savings over time now. But additionally, in EV mode, you are typically consuming 80% less energy per mile compared to an internal combustion engine. So not only are you saving gross energy and being much more efficient, but you're also saving money. And there's a lot of interesting EVs that are coming out now, or plug-in hybrids that are very viable for your house and good solutions. There's also tax credits for vehicles as well. Next slide, please. This was a Maryland case study. It was a one-year plan that I put together for a complete decarbonization plan. Maryland is slightly different than New Jersey. The SRECs aren't worth as much. The tax credit is still there, and the energy prices are a little bit different. New Jersey has pretty good energy prices, but with the installation of a ground source heat pump, 2 electric vehicles, and a full solar system. In this case, the ground source heat pump had a well, so you didn't have to drill any vertical loops. The payback was 7 years, positive cash flow from year one. You can see that in the graph on the left. And then also the tax credit was huge in the second year. That's that big spike in year 2. And then subsequently, the way the loan was designed in this case, there was low cash flow in the first 10 years, and then after that, when the loan was paid off, the cash flows increased. So cumulatively, really good return on investment, 0 emissions, and 75% energy consumption reduction. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's the presentation. I have an appendix which will be distributed. In the appendix is my references, as well as a lot more on renewables, solar, and how some of these systems and things work. But I'm happy to answer any questions. Here's the credentials as well. And if you want to get in contact, you can go to my website and book an appointment as well. And I'm happy to spend the rest of the time, taking the questions.